Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Splendor Duel. Now this is a two-player only game that takes around 30 minutes to play on average. Now if you've made it to my channel, you're probably aware that Splendor is an existing game for 2 to 4 players, very popular and streamlined engine building game. Now Splendor Duel is designed by the original designer Marc-Andre, but it also has input by Bruno Cathala. Now generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of Cathala designs when he does games on his own. But I was a huge fan of Seven Wonders Duel, which was the two-player only version of another popular game, Splendor. So I was quite intrigued to see how he puts his twist on the Splendor format. Now, before I get into my review of Splendor Duel, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. So, of course, there are a lot of similarities between the Duel version of Splendor and the original. The winning condition is going to be essentially the same, where you're trying to collect these cards and racing towards a certain number of points. In this example, you need to get towards 20 points on these cards you acquire. However, there are some changes in the victory conditions. Like, for example, you can also be the first player to acquire 10 crowns. So you can see here that some of the cards have crowns on, or you can also win by having 10 points in the exact same category, because again, much like the original Splendor, you have all the different gem types, as you've got the red ones, the white ones, the black ones, etc. So again, if you have multiple cards of the same type and that accumulates up to 10, then you will win. Now, the biggest change in this game is how you acquire the gems in the first place. So in the original, you could just pick and choose which ones you wanted, as long as there were some available there. But in this one, you have this board that you are sharing with your opponent. And this is how you're going to draft these tiles. So when you take these tiles, you can take any orientation of horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, as long as you do not pass through these gold tokens. And they need to be next to each other as well. So for example, I could say I'll take these 3 gems here, or I could take these, maybe these 3, or these 3, depending on which ones you want, and of course which cards you are building towards. So you have the very simple gems here, which are quite easy to aim for. And for example, this one here needs two reds and 2 greens. And if you wanted to cash in those gems, you could buy this card. You wouldn't get any points in this example, but you always get a kind of bonus here, which means that in future purchases, you'll get 1 black gem discount. And as you can probably imagine, the more and more cards you acquire, the bigger and bigger discounts you get. And it makes it a lot easier to reach the more expensive cards, and where you can get a whole chunk of points here. Now, there are also other changes you can see. So on these cards, they're not only worth points and discounts on future cards, some of them have special abilities on them as well. So they're represented by these symbols here. So this symbol means that when you purchase this card, you'll instantly get another go. I believe this one here means that you can put this card in any stack and it will be a discount of which one you choose. There's ones here that let you steal from your opponents. There's also ones that will give you a kind of the opportunity to grab a matching gem from the board if there's one available. Now, another mechanism that's been added to the game are these privilege scrolls. So you can see if I bought this card, I'd get a privilege scroll. Now, there are other ways you can get privileged scrolls as well, but if you grab these, it means that before your actual turn, which would normally consist of either taking gems, buying a card, or reserving a card by putting it in your personal card supply, and you can do that up to 3 times, much like the original, and you'd also grab a gold gem, which is a wild. But these privilege scrolls would actually let you kind of do a pre-turn, I suppose, and grab any gem of your choice from the board, as long as it's not gold. So these can be really useful, and there's only 3 of them available. So it means that if there's one there, you can grab it, but if there's none left and you gain a privilege, you can actually grab it off your opponent. So there's a few little twists there. And that's essentially what the differences are. And as normal, again, you're trying to race towards those cards, being the first to reach one of those 3 winning conditions. Now, the scrolls will also count towards these 4 public characters. Now, much like the kind of, I believe they're called like patrons or the nobles from the original game, these are going to be kind of a first come, first served characters. And these, you're going to get these by gaining 3 crowns or 6 crowns. So, when you reach 3 crowns, you grab one. If you gain 6 crowns, you'll grab another one. And these will give you points and will also give you the ability to do one of these special kind of actions there. Again, stealing gems, getting another turn, or taking a privilege. Now, as you can probably imagine, as the game goes on, the board here is going to get depleted by these depleted of gems. And as again, another pre-turn and optional action, you can choose to replenish the board state by refilling them from the bag here. And they'll be done in a very specific order so that you can't kind of game gems that you particularly want. And if you refill the board, because of course you're going to be giving yourself a nice option to do that, you're also going to give your opponent a privilege. So sometimes there's a bit of a tension of, I hope my opponent refills the board. Yes, they're going to get first dibs, but I'm going to get a privilege for doing so. And then again, you're going to race and race and race until you get all those cards, much like the original Splendor. And I think I've covered all the differences there. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning how I felt about the original Splendor, because of course there was a lot of similarities here. I always thought that Splendor was a very well designed game, very clean, hard to streamline it any further, and I always appreciate that. But I couldn't help but feel that the game was somewhat sterile, and it left me wanting. I always thought that it was kind of a bit procedural, and almost by the halfway point or 3/4 point, I was ready for it to end, and I thought it dragged on a little bit long, despite even not being a long game. Now, despite me actually thinking that every element of change in Splendor Duel is for the better. Like, for example, I think the drafting system is much more interesting because, it's a bit more of a puzzle to it. Rather than just grabbing the gems that you wanted. Yeah, definitely think this is a huge improvement. I think the multiple winning conditions is a lot better. It means you need to be on the ball a bit better and keep an eye on your opponent and what they're aiming for. Because yeah, you could be getting a ton of points, but they could be aiming towards the crown cards and can kind of beat you to the punch there. So again, something you have to be very careful of. I also do like those kind of mini decisions of, am I going to give my opponent a privilege by refilling the board? Can I string turns together by aiming towards certain cards and getting repeat turns by getting that kind of bonus action there? And these become very useful and get another good touch to the game. I do definitely feel like the lasting impression was pretty much identical to the original Splendor. And again, this is one of those games that I should like, everything about it. I'm struggling to look why I don't like it, because again, it's so streamlined. It's actually quite satisfying when you get that engine rolling. But again, I just feel that it's so procedural and so clinical that it's almost, again, it just lacks a bit of soul for me. And I felt the exact same way with the original as I do with this one. Despite there being some good interaction here, it's a very pivotal part of the game, beating your opponent to draft the tiles you want, or the tokens you want, the cards you want, etc. There is interaction embedded into every aspect of this game. I think it could have been taken further through the drafting system. Like, for example, normally you can only take those 3 tokens next to each other. I do feel like, say you drafted these ones here, like so, I think it would have been a cool idea if that would have been, or given your opponent the opportunity to draft 3 in a row, even if there are gaps between them. So this will create a new opportunity for your opponent to grab a red, a blue and a black, rather than just getting 3 that are exactly next to each other. And I'm quite surprised that wasn't added into the game, and it would have made things a little bit more interesting and add a little bit more consequence to your actions. So yeah, I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity there. Maybe I'm missing some balancing issue, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think I am. And I think it would have been a really nice touch and made it even more dynamic if that was an actual rule. Now, one new thing that I did not mention is that there are a new resource here, these pearls. Now, these are slightly different by the fact that there are no cards with pearl engine building benefits on them. So no cards that are ever going to decrease the amount of pearls that you need. Now, in the games we played, that kind of brought the game to a bit of a standstill and made it a bit slow and plodding, because there were loads of cards in the tableau that needed pearls, but of course we were sharing 2 between us, and of course once you spend them they'll go back in the bag, meaning that someone's going to have to fill the board back up and so on. So I definitely thought that slowed the game down a bit, and I don't actually think that helped the game. So that's probably one of the only changes that I didn't like. I do appreciate how the game maintained that simple turn structure. You're taking 1 of 3 very simple actions on your turn, either take gems, buy a card, or reserve a card with a piece of gold. I love how that's been maintained, very clean and easy to digest, so full respect in that regard. Now, I suppose the big elephant in the room for me, and something that I'm surprised more people weren't talking about, at least from what I've seen, is that the actual original game of Splendor played well at 2 players. Now, despite me enjoying all the slight changes that have been made here, again, especially the drafting mechanism in Splendor Duel, I'm kind of thinking, why would you choose this one when you could have a more versatile game with the original Splendor that could tailor towards 3 or 4 players should you need it to? Now, I suppose if you have a designated partner who you play all your games with, then I'd say, yeah, definitely choose Splendor Duel over the original because I think the game is better. But I don't think it's that much better to forsake that 3 or 4 player option. I think the production here is fantastic. The cards look great. I think they actually look better than the original. Nice and vibrant, a slightly more cartoony aesthetic with this one. You've got smaller cards and things, but of course it's a small little game that fits in a nice little box here. So yeah, I definitely like this box size. So yeah, full props for the production choices here. You've got that still the quality poker chips here in a slightly smaller format, but yeah, I do definitely like the way everything looks here. Yeah, no issues at all with the production. In fact, it's very nice. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Splendor Duel. Now, I have to say, I pretty much feel the exact same way about this one as I did with the original. Despite appreciating it from a mechanical standpoint and a design standpoint, and how clean and how streamlined the rule set is, I just felt somewhat numb with it. I just don't get too much enjoyment from the clinical nature and that procedural nature of the gameplay. Now, I'm so surprised by that because I should like this game on paper. I think that all these slight twists are improvements on the original, but again, that loss of the flexibility of the player count is a big hindrance. So definitely take that into consideration. And that for me would be the main takeaway talk point that I have to say about this game. Are you willing to sacrifice that 3 or 4 player count for some very slight rules tweaks? Now, again, the drafting system here is much more interesting. I think it could have been even more interesting if that mechanism I mentioned earlier with being able to take 3 in a row or column or diagonal would still be an option, even if there are gaps between them, because you would still be restricted by the gold tokens blocking you anyway, but it would have added another dimension to that player interaction. So objectively, this is a good game. If you like the original Splendor, you are certainly going to like this one. I definitely do not think you need to own both of them. So yeah, that's it really. It's just more Splendor. So yeah, are you willing to just play this at 2 players with those slight improvements, or are you going to stick with the original and maintain that player count flexibility?